Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Brock Chavis, a UPCI Multicultural Ministries Director, and I'm here today with an episode of Multicultural Stories with my guest, whom I'm excited to introduce to you, is Pastor Jason Upton from Somerset, Pennsylvania. He pastors there in that community, and he is also a law enforcement officer. And I'm very excited to have you here and part of this program today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here today.
Well, I want to just mention in the beginning here that this is a part of our series that we've entitled Multicultural Stories. This is a series where we invite guests to talk about their upbringing, talk about how they came to the Lord, how they came to the United Pentecostal Church, and also to talk a little bit about current events and certain issues that we're facing in our world and in our nation or here in North America at this time. A couple disclaimers today. Let me first share that if we have some background noise, we have some maintenance going on here at World Headquarters, and they're doing some work on our roof. And so throughout the video, if there are some mechanical sounds in the background, we apologize for that in advance. So I want to thank you for joining us today, and we're excited about this episode and this interview. And so let's just dive right into our interview today. So thankful to have Pastor Upton with us. I got to know Brother Upton just from conversing with him through ministers' forums with the United Pentecostal Church. I really got to know him just hearing his perspectives on law enforcement facing the crisis that we have in many communities in North America today. And I found him to be very outspoken, but also to be very level-headed and having an approach that I felt was productive and helpful, helping people understand some of the nature of police work, and his perspective as an apostolic oneness Pentecostal pastor certainly has heightened the effectiveness of his communication, helping us to understand more about how law enforcement and how the community interact together. And so I'm glad to have him with us today, and we're going to talk about several questions. Some you might feel are controversial, some may be awkward in discussion or awkward just to watch us discuss it. But remember, this is the nature of what we're doing with Multicultural Stories. We're sharing our stories and our perspectives. And you may not agree with everything that is said here today, but what we want to provide is a voice from different areas of our community. And so, Pastor Upton, I'm glad to have you with us today. I appreciate you traveling to come and be a part of this.
Absolutely.
And why don't we begin just by you sharing your story. Tell us a little bit about your background, your personal history, your family, and then tell us about how you came to the Lord and how you got connected or involved with the United Pentecostal Church.
Absolutely. First, Brother Chavis, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here and speak and being a voice for my community. The law enforcement community is really appreciated. A lot of folks nowadays don't want to hear us talk, and so thank you so much for the opportunity. I was born and raised by the grace of God in an apostolic pastor's home. I am a third generation apostolic Pennsylvania church planter. My grandfather planted an apostolic church in the 1960s. My dad planted one in the 1980s, and I planted one in the 2000s.
Wow.
And so I've got a young son that just recently told me, Dad, I guess I'm going to be a preacher. So I'm hoping that he continues that trend in planting a church. God blessed me with a beautiful wife, Lisa. I'm sure he's going to watch this. I've got two daughters, Nevaeh and Hayden, and a son, Gage. And we planted a church on February 5th of 2006 in Somerset, Pennsylvania. And God has blessed that church, and it has grown to the point where we're looking to purchase more property and build, and God has just really blessed. And I've been fortunate to pastor a church like that. But I didn't want to pastor. That's my story. I got called to ministry at 15 years old. I was baptized in Jesus' name when I was 7 in a creek, Muddy Creek. My dad baptized me in Jesus' name. At 8 years old, I received the Holy Ghost in 1989 at the Pennsylvania UPC camp. which I think is very interesting because I was not raised in a UPC home, an apostolic home, but I got the Holy Ghost at a UPC camp.
Wow.
And so I believe that God was setting things in place for me to eventually get my license, become a pastor in a Pentecostal church. At 15, God called me to be a preacher, but I fought the call to pastor. God has built it inside of me to want to help my community, and so I knew earlier on that I wanted to be a law enforcement officer. I love people, I love protecting people, being there to help them, and so I kind of told God what he was going to do with my life. So I planned on going to Penn State, getting a bachelor's degree in administration of justice, and I wanted to be a Pennsylvania State Trooper. Meanwhile, I got the call of God in my life. And so I told God, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to join the military, which I did in 1999. I'm going to get my bachelor's degree, and I'll preach on the side, Jesus. I'll be the assistant pastor somewhere. That's what I'm going to do. About 18 years old, I was leading service at my dad's church, and God spoke to me and said, you're going to pastor the house of prayer. So I kind of laughed it off and said, nah, it ain't going to happen, Jesus. And so I put that off because I wanted to be a state trooper. And so September 11th happened, and after September 11th happened, I was placed on active duty and went into one of the darkest times of my life, spiritually speaking. You probably don't even know this place, but I was shipped to Pope Air Force Base in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Oh, yeah, I know that place very well.
And so I was there in October. About November, I really hit a deep, dark place spiritually where I tell folks that was my well that swallowed me. And there in Fayetteville, North Carolina, on Pope Air Force Base, I got on my knees and I prayed and I said, God, I know you want me to pastor. I'm going to put all my plans to the side and I'm going to do what you want me to do, God.
Wow.
After that prayer meeting, I felt everything shift in my spirit. I get up, I called my fiance at the time, Lisa, who's back in Pennsylvania, planning our wedding. And I said, sweetheart, I said, I know we're getting married in about 9 months. I said, but we're going to go to IBC. You always know it's God's will when he tells you to go to IBC. So I said, we're going to go to IBC. I said, when we finish up there, we're going to move to Somerset, Pennsylvania and start a church. And so we moved to IBC, and I was still in the military at the time, but by the grace of God, I didn't get deployed or nothing of that nature. Came back to Pennsylvania. We started a church the following year on February 5th of 2006. And 15 years later, we're still pastoring the church, and it's growing, and God is blessing. But it started in your neck of the woods down in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
That's amazing. I did not, after all we've taught, I hadn't made that connection. I grew up going out to Pope Air Force Base. Many members of our church were there on the base, lived on the base, and attended our church. So that's an interesting connection.
Absolutely, and that's my well experience. It put things in perspective. And from that time on, I started following what God wanted me to do. But I always still had the desire deep inside of me to serve my community. I did so in the military, and I felt a desire to do so as a police officer. And that kind of got put on pause for about a 10-year period until we got the church established where we wanted it to be.
And you're currently serving actively as a police officer and as a pastor in the community.
That is correct.
How old were you when you first began feeling called or led to pursue police work?
I was probably about 16 years old, and God has always put a desire in my heart to serve our community. Probably can't tell from the video, I'm not exactly a small guy. I'm 6 foot, 225 pounds, and I have no problem protecting those that can't protect themselves. And that's always been a desire God put inside of me to safeguard, which is probably part of the reason why God called me to pastor also. You've got that shepherding mentality where you just want to protect those that can't protect themselves.
Sure. Let me touch on something here. Many times when we talk about the police community and law enforcement, and you know what, let me backtrack a little bit. Let me just make a statement. I want to make this statement. I hope everybody will catch this. We want to say that we support and we believe in our law enforcement community. There is there's so many negative things out there. And to be fair, much of it has been caused by mistakes that have been made, and individuals who also wear the uniform that have made missteps, bad decisions, and some of those decisions have had tragic results.
Absolutely.
But despite that, as a whole, we generally want to make the statement. I want to say to you and to those that you serve with that we support the law enforcement community. We believe in the law enforcement community. There are many in our nation right now who are suggesting the idea that we would not have a police force. Many of our cities seem to be espousing that thinking. But I want to say that we support law enforcement, and we have many law enforcement officers who are part of our churches.
Absolutely.
They're members in our churches. They're also involved in ministry. And so this is an area of our community that we cannot neglect or look behind, look past, because in this season, this is another side of it.
Absolutely.
It would be easy for us to just follow the media narrative and focus on victims. And this is something, I can't overstate this enough. We have to be concerned about victims. But there's another side of it when we consider that we have law enforcement officers who are also our brothers and even sisters in Christ, who are part of the Christian community, who are going out there every day. They're giving their heart and soul into protecting and serving others, and they're just not connected with the issues that are hitting mainstream media. And this is difficult to navigate, to talk about this, because we want to be fair, we want to be kind, and we want to be outreaching to every community and every culture that is involved in this whole discussion. But leading from that, many times when we talk about law enforcement, the emphasis is placed on the officer and the officer's experiences. But another side and another sphere of this is the sacrifices of the family.
Absolutely.
The things that people like your wife and children go through. They're watching you go out the door every day to protect and serve the community, and because of things that are happening, could be a very real fear that maybe you don't return whole. And so share with us a little bit about the perspective around families' feelings and concerns.
Well, I'll be honest with you, Brother Chavis. I really truly didn't realize the impact me serving my community as an officer was going to have on my family directly. They don't really talk about that in the police academy, and there's not much written about the impact, but when you start to live it, you start to see the change it has on your family. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm probably going to get a little emotional here because God has blessed me with 3 wonderful children, amazing wife, wonderful sisters, great mom and dad to support me. But I have seen how it has affected all of my family by me serving our community. Just last week, 2 weeks ago, I was working midnight shift, and my wife told me when I got home at 3 a.m., my middle daughter, Hayden, woke up screaming and crying, running into the room, "Mommy, I had a dream Daddy got killed at work." My children have nightmares. And when you hear that the people you love are having nightmares about you being shot and killed, or you being burned up in a fire or something of that nature, it affects you a lot. And I never dreamed in 1,000 years that my children would be affected that much by me serving the community. But it's not uncommon for all 3 of my children to have nightmares about me getting hurt. I didn't quite realize the effects it was having on my wife until about a year ago. To be honest with you, I wasn't thinking, and Lisa will probably tell you it's not the first time that has happened, but I wasn't thinking. I was at work, I was at the station, and I was getting a little behind, and so instead of me using my phone to call home, I used the station phone. And when she seen that it was the station calling, when she answered, she was freaking out, and I had to calm her down, and I was like, "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" She told me, she said, "I thought you got hurt." She said, "I thought someone was calling me to tell me that either you had died or you were hurt. I didn't realize that it was just you." And I didn't make those connections, and my family was going through stressors and issues like that until you start talking to them and you realize that my children pray for me and make sure I come home safely, because they just don't know. I work a lot over at the school sometimes during the school year, and I've got to the point where I tell my children's teachers that if you see my children being anxious a little bit, just reassure them I'm okay, because my children have told me, Dad, we are used to seeing you during the day walking through the school because we have to do foot patrols, and if we don't see you, we're worried that you may have got hurt. And so something that seems so innocuous as going a foot patrol through a school is no issue for most of the students, but for my kids,
right.
Well, Daddy's supposed to be here. Did he get hurt? Did he get killed? Did somebody shoot him? That's what's going through their head. And so the families of police officers carry a heavy weight with them. And I'll be honest with you, Brother Chavis, there is no ministry for it.
Yeah.
None. We have a growing ministry for law enforcement officers, but it's so small. Statistics tell us there's 800 to 900 police officers in the United States, including federal officers and deputy sheriffs and so forth.
800 to 900,000.
Yes, 800 to 900,000. And there's very little ministry towards that segment of society. Every town or city of reasonable size have police officers.
Right.
But where's the ministry for them? It's non-existent. And some places do, but there's nothing for the families. Because how does a wife share the concern and fear she has for her husband being murdered with somebody who doesn't carry that type of life stressor? And so it's not uncommon for my wife to sometimes have sleepless nights, or my children, because they're concerned whether or not I want to come home. I didn't realize, once again, and it's ignorance on my behalf, but I didn't realize how much it was affecting my mom and dad till a little while ago. They had come up to the city where I police, and I had taken lunch with them, and we got done. My mom came up and gave me a big hug and went through a motherly discussion on, you need to take care of yourself. Make sure you come home every night. I don't want to lose you as a son. And so they're carrying a weight and an understanding of the possibility of me being hurt in a violent act that I didn't realize I was going to go through. And it's not discussed in the police academies at all. You're not told how it's going to affect your family. You're just told how to do the job, and you need to learn to deal with bad stuff.
My experience is a lot with the military, and the military actually provides a lot of support for military spouses and children. And I can't speak to how effective it is, or I know our local church does some of those things. But I would think that the police force would have some spousal and child support programs. So it's interesting that it's not there. I think what Brother Upton is sharing with us is an example to us is how we're in error sometimes if we begin to paint everybody with the same brush. We're at a particular season in our nation where we have seen some examples of bad behavior.
Absolutely.
That have been put under a national spotlight of media attention. And as the church, we have to remember that we are we're trying to reach everybody in our community. And everybody in our community also means people who serve, first responders, and men like Brother Upton who serve in our police force. And so I think we're in error when we apply what we're seeing in the media to an entire group, because that's wrong on both ways. This happens. Our media paints particular cultures in our country and characterizes cultures in a certain way, and we find that in reality that characterization is often wrong. It's often false. It's often wildly unbased.
Absolutely.
And that same principle goes both ways here. So let me ask you this before we get into some more tougher questions, but let me ask you this question. How has God been able to use you as a law enforcement officer in situations to minister to people?
I'm glad you asked. What you don't see in the media and what happens every single day across the United States is the opportunities police officers have to really minister and serve in their community. What most people don't realize, most officers, and this is a generalization because when you have 900,000 police, it's a generalization. They love people, they love their community, and they want to serve. Me personally, here just recently, and I apologize for sharing a personal story, but
that's what we're here to do.
My partner and I got called to a domestic situation, and we arrive on scene. And a husband and wife are fighting. He had lost his job, and he had a criminal history, spent time in state prison. Through the course of our discussion with this couple, it came to light the reason they are fighting is because they have no money to buy food and diapers for their child. We could have threw our hands up and said, that doesn't involve us, that doesn't concern us, calm yourself down, quit disturbing, we are leaving. We didn't do that. I looked at the man with the criminal history and I said, this is what we're going to do. And my partner and I were in agreement with this. He said, you go down to the local store, we're going to meet you there, and we're going to buy everything your son needs.
Wow.
And so me and my partner, and it blew the guy's mind. He's like, are you serious? Yeah, this is what we do. And our motto is to protect and serve. And we had a discussion with him about God and how you need to pray and get your life right. Just beautiful discussion in that setting. We met him down at the local store. We bought all the diapers on the shelf that fit his child. And at the time, and I'm a husband, I love my wife and children. I said, now listen, you just had a fight with your wife. You got to suck up a little bit. I said, go get a candy bar, or drink something. And it just broke the man. He said, I'm not used to being treated like this. That goes on all the time. I've bought hotel rooms for homeless people in our community. And that's not just me. Every officer I know in our department, same thing with our state police in the area, we've bought meals for people, and we're not posting it on social media. Yeah. We're not taking pictures and putting them out there. We bought hotel rooms for people. God has put us in a position where we are dealing with broken, hurting, and destitute people. And a lot of times the officers, they don't want the accolades of the community. They're doing their job. This is what God has called them to do. And you mentioned something earlier that I just highlight right here. You said, well, when did you feel a call to be a police officer? Most officers view their job as a calling. And they connect it in their relationship with God. This is what God wants me to do. And so they go out in their community and they give hugs to little children that just been through some of the most traumatic events possible. And they show them that people care about them, buy food for people, put gas in cars. Our officers in the department I serve in have done that so many times, and we're not bragging about it. We're not putting it on social media. We do it because we feel that is what God wants us to do. And so God has used us in that capacity. Also, being a police officer in my community, and most folks know that I'm also a pastor, and so that has been such an interesting blend and dynamic that God has used that to connect me to a large contingent of our community, both professionally as well as those that are in need. So as a police officer, I've been asked to say the prayer. We had a corrections officer in our community get violently killed. Sergeant Mark Baserman was violently killed while serving his community as a corrections officer. And I was asked by our officials to come in uniform as a police officer and provide the invocation in our county courthouse to recognize his service and sacrifice. That would not have happened if I wasn't a police officer. But I don't hide my faith as an officer either.
That's great.
So God gives us opportunities. And then you get to meet people a lot of times in their most worst and dire situation and be there and show the love of Christ to them. And it's an opportunity to really show folks that there is a narrative sometimes in our community that is spun about officers that is false, that there are officers that truly do care about their community and want to serve their community, and we're given that opportunity every day.
I can't tell you how many personal friends I have who are either involved in law enforcement or they're involved in chaplain work to their local law enforcement office. And I do think, and I'm not saying that I am espousing that this is a career choice that people need to make. I'm not saying anything for or against it, but I'm saying it does create quite an opportunity to come in contact with people who are in need. And I do feel like it's a calling. I said that word intentionally. I feel like it's a calling for police officers and teachers as well in our communities. These are two professions that people who do it, they have to be doing it for more than the money, because we don't pay you enough. And I wish we paid a lot more to police officers and teachers and valued those professions more. And so I do feel like it's a calling. People feel that desire to that. Well, in a time and a season of social unrest and tension around the subject of police brutality, and we've seen some cases in the past couple of months that are being talked about as police brutality. I'm not expert on all of the situations that have happened. At least one I know I personally had a reaction to, that I felt like if there ever was a case of police brutality, this was it, and that was the case of George Floyd. But in this season, you know, you're on the streets every day, you're dealing with your community every day. On the subject of the idea of police brutality, share with us your experience and your perspectives on these matters.
Absolutely. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to address this. First, I'll address the underlying issue, and I'm speaking anecdotal from my experience, so this is not an absolute across the law enforcement spectrum. But where I police in Pennsylvania, I'll be honest with you, I have not met one racist police officer. I have served with minority police officers. Every single police officer wants to go out and serve the community, and I have seen the officers defend and protect African Americans, Orientals, Hispanics, whites. They do their job regardless of the person's skin color. Now, with that said, I can't speak authoritatively for all 900,000, but representative of my experience, there's no racism where I'm at. Folks are serving their community, period. And it doesn't matter the makeup of the community. When we take our oath of office, we take our oath pledging that we are going to serve justice in our community regardless of a person's race, color, creed, orientation, anything of that nature. We're going to treat everybody fairly. With that said, I am sure that there are racist police officers in the United States. Anytime you have a profession of 900,000 people, you're going to have some folks get into that profession that are in it for the wrong reason. And so my philosophy is simple. I don't like to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so I don't want to characterize 899,000 good police officers because you got a handful, just to be blunt, a handful of people that are misguided, racist, doing whatever wrong. With that said, we'll get to the police brutality in a second. I feel like a politician skirting around the issue here. With that said, nothing makes police officers more aggravated than bad police officers. We view our profession very highly. And as you said, we view it as a calling. Most officers I talk to, they love to quote Jesus' words, "Blessed are the peacemakers." God put us here for a reason. We are standing the line between chaos and civilization. Without this rule of law, there'd be anarchy. And nothing makes us more aggravated than when you have a police officer violate somebody's rights or do something wrong. And so I know that the media will often tell you that it's swept underneath the rug. That is a mischaracterization. We investigate wrong done by police officers, because when a police officer does wrong, it reflects negatively on all of us. And we take an oath, and part of our ethics is to obey the law as well as uphold the law. And so when we see an officer who is not obeying the law, we have an internal investigation, or if it gets up-channeled to the FBI, in a civil rights violation, they come in, and most of that is at the behest of other officers. Of course, the media doesn't tell you that, because they want you to think that all the police officers are in cahoots together and they're protecting their own. Our honest view is that man is not our own. He's not part of us. We are here to maintain justice and order and see fair and equitable treatment to every single citizen in our community, regardless of who that person is. And if somebody violates that, they're going against who we are as a group. And so we have issues with that. I know without a doubt that there has been instances of police brutality, because any time that you have two individuals in an aggressive manner, it is easy for human emotions to get out of hand. I also believe that what some people label as police brutality has been a false narrative that has been spun by the media, because when you see the events unfold and you follow the proper use of force that has been set up by law enforcement, everything falls in line the way it should. And so in a lot of situations, what is labeled as police brutality is not. The officers did not overreact. They used the appropriate amount of force necessary to control the situation, and the situation ended whenever the suspect was taken into custody. And as I said, on the flip side of that, there are the rare instances, and the numbers is infinitesimally small, where it has been police brutality. A case in point from down in your neck of the woods, I believe it was in South Carolina, probably about 5 years ago. We had a situation where a police officer shot a man in the back that was running. It was caught on video. The officer answered up for it. He was charged, and I think he's doing 20 to 25 years in prison now for shooting this man in the back. And so the idea that police brutality is swept under the rug and is not prosecuted is not the truth. They are held accountable for their actions. What we really say when we say that is that it doesn't happen quick enough. And the truth of the matter is, if we want due process, we would need to have due process for everybody, including the police officer. And so instead of jumping to conclusions and automatically assuming that the police overreacted, wisdom is saying, I want due process for me. Let's give due process to the officer as well, and to make sure his actions were justified. If the actions of the officer was not justified, me and every other police officer wants him to answer for his actions not being justified. Because when he messes up, it makes me look bad, and I don't want to look bad.
Makes your job harder in the community.
Absolutely. And so every officer that I know, and every officer that takes the oath of office, never wants to be in a use of force encounter. Never. We do not go to work saying, boy, I hope I get into a fight today. That never crosses our mind. We do everything we can to make sure something does not escalate to that point. A lot of officers are trained in de-escalation techniques, and they work by and large. But just to be honest, Brother Chavis, our world is evil. There are bad people in our world. And you could try every de-escalation technique possible. You could try every non-lethal use of force at your disposal. And sometimes some people are just bent on doing bad things to bad people. And you have to use force to control the situation. Which, going back to the calling thing discussion, most officers believe, and I just had this discussion with one of my officers. He said, can you give me some scriptures on being a police officer? I said, read Romans chapter 13. You know, God has given the sword, or the use of force, to the government to maintain order. And if you have an evil person bent on hurting others, sometimes you have to meet them with an equal or greater level of force to control the situation, to protect the innocent folks in the area. We don't want that to happen. I'll be honest with you. And if you ever get a chance and anybody's interested in reading, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman is an expert on interpersonal human aggression. He wrote a book called On Combat, where he talks about the effects of aggression in combat and aggression in law enforcement situations, and how it scars the people involved. And interpersonal human aggression leaves the deepest scars on a person's heart. And it's really the source for a lot of PTSD that officers go through. And so that's why we know that. And so we don't want to be in a use of force situation. We do everything we can to not be in a use of force situation. And so the idea the police go to work and they're targeting people and they want to be in a violent encounter, that's a false narrative. At the end of the day, I got a wife and 3 children to go home to, and that's my priority. And anything I can do to arrest somebody that has violated the law without force, I do it, and every other officer I know does the same thing.
I'm just sitting here thinking as you're talking, 800,000 to 900,000 police officers in the United States. Somewhere probably between 50 to 75% of those officers are on duty any given day. Probably 1/2 or 2/3 of those police officers are not in administrative roles, so they're actively engaged in the community.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about, in a day's time, we're talking about thousands of interactions, interdictions with the community where officers are in any number of things, from domestic disputes to as challenging as high-speed chases or dealing with bank robbers, down to small infractions such as, alcohol and substance abuse in public, and speeding tickets and things of that nature. So thousands of interactions every day. I think one thing, having said that makes the analyzation of police encounters difficult is that it's so situational.
Absolutely.
Every situation is different. There's almost no 2 instances where things happen the same way. And I'm sure there's commonalities and similarities, and that's where your training comes from. So that kind of leads me to this question. Have you seen instances where there were situations, and I'm not talking about the current issues, but just in general, but are there situations sometimes where, when viewed by the general public that has a lack of understanding about police protocols and training, there are situations that can be misinterpreted as whether it may be brutality or unjust action, that officers are situationally caught up where they're making snap decisions, and training and protocols are kind of ruling the situation, but viewed from an outside objective look, it can seem very different.
Absolutely. I hate to refer to a Facebook meme, but it seems like reality is painted by Facebook nowadays. But there's a Facebook meme floating around right now that shows a police officer on a traffic stop, and it shows the driver in the front seat, the police officer is at the beat post of the door, and he's got his hand on his service weapon. And the bottom part of the meme tags, if he is this scared as a police officer, he shouldn't be here. And so many people are sharing that meme and alleging that the police officer is being overly aggressive on the traffic stop, and he's kind of creating an atmosphere in which he's being aggressive. What people don't realize, first off, in that situation, if I pull you over, let's say you come to Somerset next week and you're flying 100 miles an hour through town. And I pull you over. And I pull you over. First off, I may not even know who you are as the driver. There's numerous traffic stops I have that I've not seen the driver, I've seen the infraction. So to automatically assume he pulled that person over because they're Hispanic, they're black, they're white, you're creating a narrative that's not reality because I didn't see the driver. Secondly, I don't know who you are. I don't know your plans for me. You know whether or not, when I pull you over, whether or not you're going to shoot me. As I approach the vehicle, I don't know that. I have no clue who you are. I don't know what your intentions are. I don't know if you've got drugs in the car. I don't know if you've got weapons in the car. And as I said, I've got a wife and 3 children that's my priority to go home to. And so officers are trained in any situation that you have to be ready for potential threats of violence. And if you are interested, YouTube is filled with traffic stop videos of officers pulling a car over and the suspect jumping out and shooting rifles at them, pistols. They're there. And so for us to approach every situation as though it's a 90-year-old grandma on her way to church is a false premise. It's not realistic. We have to assume a position of caution. And so officers are trained as they approach the vehicle to stay behind the B post of the door. Because if I'm right beside you, it's easy to pull a gun and shoot me. Mm-hmm. If I'm behind the B post, you're going to have to turn around completely to face me. So it's putting an officer in a safe position. And secondly, every time I approach a vehicle, my hand is in the area of my sidearm. In case this guy pulls a gun on me, I'm ready to return fire and protect myself as well as the general public. Because if the guy's willing to shoot at me, he's also willing to shoot at you. And so officers approach that situation for the purpose of officer safety, to make sure the situation is safe. Mm-hmm. What I do as I approach the vehicle, I talk to the driver. Can I see your driver's license, registration, proof of insurance? I assess the situation. At that point, if I feel comfortable that this individual has no ill intent, then I somewhat change my approach. I still stay vigilant. I'm still looking through the vehicle, and I'm still maintaining officer safety, and I'm still ready that if I need to respond and use my firearm or grab a taser or whatever at that point, I'm ready to do so. But that's after I assess the situation, after I know and I'm reasonably comfortable that you're not going to try to kill me. Because the reality is not everybody you pull over cares about you.
Sure.
Some people, they want to do you harm. Some people have warrants for them, and they know that right now you're about to take them back to jail. And so they have ill intent, and they've got a desire to hurt law enforcement. And you've got a responsibility to approach that vehicle in a safe manner. And a lot of folks that's never been in a situation like that don't quite understand. Mm-hmm. The officer's being aggressive. He's not being aggressive at all. He's just maintaining his safety because he's got children that he wants to go home to.
Sure. I want to drill down, okay?
Absolutely.
And here, this question will be awkward for some, but in our nation right now, mm-hmm. I think you'd agree that we're dealing with a very real stigma.
Absolutely.
Against the police force.
Mm-hmm.
And we have an issue, whether we want to call it media-driven or we want to call it factual, the issue is there, mm-hmm. that there is a tension between law enforcement in the United States and the black community in the United mm-hmm. States. What's your thoughts? What's your perspectives on this? Mm-hmm. You know, what could you share on this topic?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking that question. I'm going to speak first from my own personal experience. Mm-hmm. The town I police in is a wonderful town with a growing minority population, and I'll be honest with you, Brother Chavis, we have zero issues. We have blacks in the community. We have a growing Hispanic community. We interact with them. We relate with the subcultures that are there. There is no issue. Just recently, I was driving down the road, and one of the older black men in the community, I've talked with him for years now. You know, he's waving, "Hey, Officer Upton, how you doing?" We have built a rapport with our community, and so where I police, there's not an issue. There just isn't. With that said, when you get into bigger communities, major cities, you have very few police officers for the population you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And so the officers aren't quite known as much in the community. They're just seen as the man in the blues and blacks, or the blacks and whites, the police cars going down the street. And they see them as a completely separate entity. And so there's not a lot of interaction in those bigger communities, except for when there's a criminal offense. And so, like with me, I'll stop at Sheetz, it's a local gas station, and I'll get a drink. Well, in there, there'll be white folks, Hispanics folks, black folks interact. "Hey, how you doing today? It's good to see you." We have built a rapport with our community, mm-hmm. And that rapport has torn down walls and issues that are there. They feel comfortable coming to us and talking to us and saying, "Hey, officer, it's good to see you today." In bigger communities where the police aren't directly injected into the community, they're still seen as an outsider. And so that has created a wall and a division between minorities and police because they're not interrelating with each other. In some bigger cities, the only interaction that a black kid may have with a police officer is when a criminal offense has been done. and he sees the police officer showing up and arresting his dad or his mom or his brother for a criminal offense. So the only thing they know about police is, oh, they take my dad. That's all they know. And I think part of the way to help fix that is to get back towards a community-oriented policing approach, where you have police officers not exactly there to catch the criminal, but police officers in that community helping the children to steer them away from a life of crime.
Let's flesh this out a little bit. We talked about this off camera earlier this morning, and I was completely unaware of this, but when you mentioned community policing, if I'm correct in what you were saying, there was a federal program in place for about a decade that funded police officers to be able to go into the communities and basically do things other than interdict crime. And so they are at basketball games, they're involved in school activities, they're engaging with the community on a level that they're not necessarily searching for criminals. They're not doing those kind of things, but they're there simply to build relationships in the community.
Absolutely.
So this was a thing that went on for quite some time, federally funded.
Yes.
And so if I'm getting this correctly from you, at least in a general, I guess local communities can do whatever they want with their funds, but as far as the federal backing of it, this has changed now.
That's correct.
And so the funding for this type of police work in most large communities has been removed. And so police officers are back to
being reactive instead of proactive.
I think that's key. Reactive instead of proactive.
Absolutely.
Well, it sounds to me like it's particularly in the larger communities, it sounds like it's a recipe for bad and escalating events to happen.
Absolutely.
If a police officer spends 90% of his time dealing with criminals in a certain community, no matter what the neighborhood is or no matter what the community is, it can be very difficult to differentiate from the, let's say like this, the 15-year-old young man who's in a gang and the 15-year-old young man who's on the way to an after-school tutor that's not in a gang. And when that law enforcement officer has spent the majority of his last several weeks dealing with gang members, would you say that can bleed over into that experience?
Absolutely. It's human nature. You deal with somebody in that context for so long, you begin to throw everybody into that same classification. And honestly, that's the same thing that's happened with police officers.
I think it's Mark Twain that said, if you're a hammer, all you see is nails, or something around that, the essence of that. Very, very interesting. I think this dialogue is good because many people, let's say they don't have personal relationships with people in their family or in their church or in their neighborhood who are part of the police force. They won't have any inside information on how these things work.
That's it.
And so their only concept of law enforcement is either from the media or from interactions with the police in traffic stops or things like that, which, nobody likes a traffic stop.
No.
So I can see where there's a potential for the stigmas, the things that stick. So in your community, you've mentioned that the way your colleagues police there, the community is small enough that you're able to do community policing approach as just part of your everyday routines. You wouldn't need federal backing to do that. And so when it comes to this same question about the tension between the black community and police in larger communities, what advice would you give? Let me drill it down this way. What advice would you give to people who might be watching this interview who are from the black community and they live in these larger communities? What advice would you give to help them bridge that gap, to try to, and obviously it can't be one-sided. We need police officers on the other side who are working together. But for those who are watching, what advice would you give in that situation?
Honestly, one of the big pieces of advice I can give And if you have an officer that really truly loves his community, he's on board. Because the whole idea of protect and serve is not just to catch criminals, it is to keep somebody from a life of crime. And that was the whole premise behind the whole COP approach, community-oriented policing, is if we could connect into the community during the formative age and years of this demographic, and not necessarily black, but this inner city demographic that is white, that is black, that is Oriental, Hispanic. You get into that dynamic and you build a relationship with the community, and you could show them the importance of justice and equity and fair treatment, and you could help steer these children away from a life of crime. You are preventing criminals. And so part of the criminal justice approach that was so important is that was the emphasis. Let's steer them away and show them what life can be without being involved in the gangs. And so what I would recommend for folks that are in that dynamic of life, whether it's in the inner city or a suburb that is growing and getting more and more criminal activity, is connect with your local law enforcement officers and say, listen, we want you guys here. We want you to come talk to our children. Show up. Go shoot hoops with the kids. If you've got a slow shift, come talk to them. We want you here. Because right now what is going on is the media is telling the police, we don't want you. Well, when we're not there, the criminal element comes in and they start taking over. And now the young child that God had a call on his life and God had a purpose, now he's not getting that influence and that push towards doing the right thing and maintaining order. He's now getting pulled into a criminal lifestyle. Whereas if there was an officer there and he could say, hey, listen, you don't need to be like that. You know, you could do something different with your life. That's what made community-oriented policing so popular. If you go back to, I'm 39 years old, and if I go back to my school days, we had McGruff the crime dog.
Yeah, I remember that.
That was part of the community-oriented policing. We were getting into schools and we were talking about how horrible drugs are and steering people away from a life of crime. And I think that is a very important aspect of policing that is still there in some departments, but in other departments it has faded away. And so you're not seeing the police out doing foot patrols in certain areas. And because of that, the children are now interacting with them. So be there. I'll share a quick story similar to this. I was doing a foot patrol in my community, and there was a young girl who had an adult supervisor with her, and she saw me. And when she looked at me, she said, "Ooh, police, you're bad." And I just smiled because I knew the little girl and I knew her background. And she said, "Ooh, you're bad. You took my daddy away." Well, I'm the type of police officer, I care. And so I get the adult that was with her. I said, well, here's the background. I said, that little girl's dad is a violent criminal who beat a guy so bad outside of a bar that he was charged with aggravated assault and nearly killed the guy. And so her dad got arrested. That's why. And so I spent the time to explain behind the emotions. I didn't just judge the little girl. I didn't belittle her.
Sure.
And I took the time to build a relationship with that little girl. And now, Brother Chavis, when she sees me, she runs up and hugs me. She high-fives me. "Officer Upton, how you doing today?"
Wow.
Because I chose to build a relationship. I didn't let what happened and the mischaracterization of events steer me away from an opportunity to change this little kid's life. And the little girl's doing fantastic now.
That's great.
She has no problems with police officers anymore. We talk, we high-five. As a matter of fact, it gets to the point that if I see her out or see her at school, sometimes the teacher's like, "Don't give him a hug, leave him alone," because I built a relationship. That's the heart of community-oriented policing, to let them realize the police are not the bad guys.
Sure.
We are here to protect and serve our community.
If someone feels that they've been unfairly treated by the police, what advice would you give? What should they do?
Well, I'll give you a couple levels of advice.
Okay.
Sometimes people are jerks, and
Yeah.
it don't matter if it is a police officer or a normal person. So evaluate the situation. You know, if it's a traffic stop and the police officer is not exactly cordial, it's possible that he had a bad day. Attribute it to him being human, nothing to do with the badge, and just blow that off, well, he's a jerk.
Okay.
If you truly felt like you were mistreated, done wrong, he violated ethics or he violated his oath of office, the first thing you need to do is to contact the local police chief or admin and report the police officer's conduct and see what happens. Most of the time, it will end at that point because the chief or the administrative sergeant will pull that officer in and address that situation. If it goes beyond that, if it is a serious ethical violation of inducement for favors or whatnot, it may be needed to be up-channeled to the district attorney in your area, who in our context in Pennsylvania, the district attorney is the head law enforcement officer for the entire county.
I see.
And so you talk to them. If it's a civil rights violation, the FBI has purview in all civil rights violations. Use of force violations, whether it is just physical, if it's non-lethal, if it's lethal, it is their purview to investigate all instances dealing with civil rights violations. And one thing I will say about being mistreated, understand that police officers are going to interact with more than just you that day. And so I think a little bit of grace helps. And what I mean by that is if you have an officer on a traffic stop and he's not exactly friendly, he walks up, I pulled you over today because you ran through that red light. Why, can't you drive? Well, it's very possible that 20 minutes before that traffic stop, he did a preliminary investigation for an 8-year-old that was sexually abused by her father, and she's crying and describing everything that her dad did to her. And he's walking out of that context with all that weighing heavy on him.
Wow.
And while he's processing that, you run a stop sign in front of him. Take that into account, because what a lot of people don't realize, we don't get breaks. It's very possible for a police officer to have the situation I described. While he finishes up with that, gets called to a cardiac arrest on a 6-month-old, does CPR on the 6-month-old, have the 6-month-old die in his hands, have to give the baby back to mom and dad and say, I'm sorry, I've done everything I could. And as soon as he clears from that call, get called to a shots fired. All in one shift.
Wow.
And there's no take a break. No, you've got a job to do. You have to protect and serve the community. And so you go from call to call to call, never actually processing the events that you went through. And then the next day you got to wake up and go right back and do it all again.
Wow. It's really interesting hearing all these perspectives. And I know that there are times when we can see an incident taking place in our world and, we see the 1 to 2 minute video that lacks context, and we can begin to form opinions.
Absolutely.
And those opinions may at times be right.
Definitely.
However, it's worth considering that there are many other perspectives. And I'm learning a lot. I feel like our audience is learning a lot through this today. We're getting close to the end of this interview. I'd like to ask you to speak to our young people for a moment. And if you would, share your suggestions on proper protocol and behavior during a traffic stop when being questioned by police. Your last few comments are very telling, because you could have, let's say for me, my son, I have a 17-year-old son. He can get pulled over by a police officer, and that police officer may have just moments before endured something that is very tragic or very frustrating, but he still has to execute his job responsibilities. Exactly. And if my son or anyone's son is behaving improperly, it could end with some very, very heavy results.
Absolutely.
Because the young person just doesn't know how to act.
Definitely.
And so I have conversation with my kids. I have one son driving with a license and one that has a permit. And I've already had conversations where I said, okay, when you get pulled over by a police officer, here's what you're supposed to do. So what I'd like you to do is just take a moment, speak to young people.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to provide this segment here as a separate segment that we're going to share. So young people who are not going to watch the previous 30 or 40 minutes of this, I want them to key in on this. talk to young people about proper behavior and protocol during a traffic stop or when being questioned by police officers on the street.
Now, that's a very good question. So let me give a couple basic protocol situational issues. Number one, if you're not sure that the person that's pulling you over is a police officer, please do not keep driving.
Okay.
This honestly happens. If you're not sure, get your cell phone. Everybody and their grandma has them now. Call 911 and say, this is so-and-so. I've got a vehicle behind me with lights on. I'm not sure if it's a police officer or not. Can you verify that it is an officer?
Okay.
That dispatch will then radio the officer and verify that yes, indeed, it is a police officer.
So what you're talking about is maybe the case of an unmarked car.
Yes.
So it's not obvious that it's a police car.
Exactly.
Okay. I hadn't thought about that. I guess that happens pretty regularly.
It happens, and I've had it happen to me before, where folks keep driving, because if you keep driving, even if you're driving the speed limit and you're failing to yield to law enforcement, you are now committing a felony because you are not pulling your vehicle over.
But I can see a teenage, inexperienced driver
being
doing
concerned.
that very thing. Maybe if it's a female, maybe
Absolutely.
concern for their safety.
Definitely.
Okay.
So any concern, call 911. Tell them where you're at. I've got a vehicle behind me that is signaling for me to pull over. Lights on. They will tell you that's the officer. The officer will have no problem with that because he cares about your safety as much as his. So, apart from that, now a regular traffic stop. First, every officer would very much appreciate you pulling off in a safe area.
Okay.
Pull far enough off the road. If you're out here on 70, don't just pull off and split the white line. Pull off safely. Domestic situations and traffic stops are the absolute most deadly events for a police officer to respond to and to be involved in. Traffic stops are deadly, not just with gunfire, but a lot of police officers every year get hit by passing motorists who aren't paying attention. So pull off. Preferably, if you can pull into a parking area
or an exit ramp.
Someplace more safe than a highly trafficked traffic road would be outstanding. After the officer has you pulled over, some things you can do to alleviate some of the officer safety issues that I mentioned earlier is when the officer approaches the vehicle, we're taught this kills. Hands kill. If hands are moving around, I don't know what you're reaching for.
Okay.
And so if I see hands moving, my first thing is, what are they going after? So instead of you reaching over and getting into the glove box right away and rifling through, like I said earlier, you know what you're reaching for, I don't. And so put your hands on the steering wheel, put your hands on the dash, the officer comes up, how you doing today, sir? I'm Officer Upton, blah, blah, blah. The reason I pulled you over is this. Do you have your driver's license, registration, proof of insurance? A good response is, yes, sir, I do. It's in my glove box. Is it okay to reach for it? Absolutely. You now told me your intentions. Now I'm still going to watch you to make sure you're not going to get something out, but now you are being respectful. You're asking questions. That's automatically making me assume right off the bat that you are going to follow directions. At that point, get the information out. Now, to thicken the plot a little bit, if you are a concealed carry and you have a weapon in the vehicle, with your hands on the steering wheel, even if it's on your purse or in the glove box, let the officer know right away.
Right.
Because I don't know what your plans are with that gun.
Does the police officer, when they run your driver's license, do they know if you're concealed carry?
In Pennsylvania, we do.
Okay.
I'm not sure about other states, but in Pennsylvania, pop up.
When I was concealed carry in North Carolina, I always told the police officer, I might be revealing a little bit that I've been stopped by the police a few times, but I always let the officer know I was carrying, because I also knew that when he pulled my driver's license, he would be aware.
Yes.
And so that let him know that I was being safe, considering his safety.
Absolutely. So let the officer know if you're concealed carry, you have the gun. I do one of three things when I do have a concealed carry, and they say, Officer Upton, I'm concealed carry, I've got it on me right now. First, I give clear directions. Well, do me a favor as I go back to my unit, keep your hands visible. And secondly, do not reach for the gun at all, or it's going to become a bad day. Don't go anywhere near it. And then I ask a series of simple questions. And I say, well, we could do this one of two ways. It is your constitutional right to carry. I've got no problem you having a gun with you. For your safety and my safety, I prefer one of two things. Would you mind if you would clear the gun, hand it to me, and I keep it with me as I go back to my car? If you're opposed to that, I'm fine with that. But would you mind clearing the gun right now, setting up on the dash so I can see it at all time? That way, I give them questions. I respect their concealed carry, but once again, I don't know what you're going to do with that gun.
Sure.
And my safety is very important, as well as your safety. Because unfortunately, you might not be thinking, and you may just do a furtive move towards the gun. Well, I've got to assume that you've got negative intentions by reaching for that gun. And really, it might just be human reaction. You may, because if you see folks, people like the chicken wing. If a guy carries a gun, you'll see him always going like this. They just like to touch it. They like to know it's there. And subconsciously, that person might just be doing that where they're just readjusting it. But if you put your hand on the gun, I've got to assume that you're going to draw and shoot at me. And so I like to give people options for their safety and my safety. That way, nothing bad escalates. Well, I probably shouldn't say it this way, but be respectful. Don't be stupid. If the officer pulled you over, there's a thing known as probable cause. We're not allowed to pull you over just because we want to pull you over. There is a reason. Speeding, tail lights out, whatever. The time to argue whether you're guilty or not guilty is not the traffic stop. Because it's already a dangerous situation with you being off the public roadway, cars going by 70 miles an hour. That's not the time to argue. If you felt that you are innocent, plead not guilty on the traffic citation. Take it before the magistrate. That is the context in which you disagree and argue with the officer that you was guilty or innocent on the traffic stop, not on the traffic stop. So give them your information, driver's license, registration, proof of insurance. You legally are required to do that, especially in the state of Pennsylvania, I know for sure. So saying, well, I'm not going to give you my license, you're going to go to jail.
Okay.
Because you have to give it.
So that's a misconception some people have.
Yeah.
If the police officer asks for your license, you're supposed to show it to them.
Yeah. You have to identify who you are. Driving is not a right; it's a privilege. You don't own the roadway; the state does. Just to give you context of the situation, you don't own it; the state owns it. And driving is a privilege you have by being a licensed driver. And when you sign your driving documents, you sign that you will identify yourself to any law enforcement officer. And so you have to give them their driver's license. If you fail to identify yourself, you will be arrested at that point, taken to an agency that can fingerprint you, and us to find out why you're not telling us who you are. And a lot of times when you don't tell us who you are, it's either out of ignorance. You got a young person that's 18, 19, 20 years old that have watched the Sovereign Citizen YouTube videos, think they don't have to do it. Or you have someone that's a wanted fugitive. And you take and identify them at that point and know who you're dealing with. At that point, really, just be respectful. The officer's going to run your information. He'll come up, he'll give you the citation or the verbal warning. And as I said, if you want to video it, video it. We're videoing the traffic stop. There's no problem with you videoing the traffic stop. If that's what you want to do, call your mom on the phone, let her listen in. That doesn't bother an officer because it's all being recorded. But at the same time, if you choose to do that, don't make it argumentative.
Right.
You know, you don't need to verbally escalate the situation. If you want to video it, go right ahead. I had a situation on a traffic stop a few years back. It was about 2 in the morning. Where a gentleman wanted to video the traffic stop, and as I'm talking to him, he was starting to get a little belligerent. I'm going to video this traffic stop. I said, I've got no problem with that, buddy. I said, because you're going to be charged for this criminal offense that's going on right now. Oh, my phone just died. No, keep recording, please. I want to subpoena this video footage for court. That way they can see everything that is going on. Because officers that are doing the right thing have no problem being videoed. Sure. Because it's going to verify that I've done my job correctly.
Right.
So if you want to video the traffic stop, have fun, go right ahead. But realize your actions are also being videoed.
But keep your hands visible.
Keep them visible. That's the most important thing I could say. In law enforcement, we refer to it as furtive movements. When you see someone reaching under the seat or reaching into the glove box. If there's multiple people in the vehicle, same deal. The best thing you can do, if you got 4 people in the vehicle, put the windows down. Just put your hands out the window, because if I see your hands, I know you're not reaching in it for anything that may harm me or my partner or the general population around you.
I'm going to give you I want to make a few remarks, few comments here, and I'm going to give you the last word, and I'll ask you just to share any message you would like to give to the general public or even to the church. United Pentecostal Church primarily would be the watchers of this. I'll end by giving you an opportunity as a police officer, as a pastor, to share your heart. But a couple things I want to say before I turn it over to you to close. It was 2013, and my father-in-law was running the Boston Marathon for his first time. He's ran a marathon race every year since 1982, the year my wife was born. This was the first time running Boston. He had trained for it very hard. And we were at the Boston Marathon. We were near the finish line on Boylston Street on the date of the Boston Marathon bombing, where the 2 brothers, the Sarnieff brothers, detonated crockpot bombs, basically, in that area. My father-in-law had come around it's the last turn of the race, the last hill. It's like 1 or 2 tenths of a mile on a slight downgrade to the finish line. He came by, he waved at us, and we walked directly down Boylston Street, and we crossed the site of the second bombing on the opposite side of, I think it's a 4-lane street. So not very far away from that second bomb, where it eventually went off about 50 minutes later.
Oh, wow.
My entire family, my wife, my 3 older children, my mother-in-law, we walked straight down to the finish line as far as we could go, probably within 10 feet of the stands before we went around through an alley, and we met with my father-in-law after he had gone through the race and got his medal. It was on that day that he told me he felt like he had wings, that he had had his fastest race time since the 80s when he was a much younger man. And so we left the area, and from the time he finished the race, it was about 50 minutes until those bombs began to detonate. In the aftermath of that, I personally spent a lot of time watching news reports, internet news reports, and just following the news of the city of Boston and that tragedy. It was heavy on my mind, as you could imagine. Just shock of it, the worry that, what could have happened.
Absolutely.
And during a time of prayer during that time, it was quickened in my mind that all these pictures and all this scenery that I was seeing, in all of that, there was a very familiar scene. And I felt like the Lord pieced it together in my mind that the familiar element, the commonality among thousands of pictures was that of a uniform.
That's it.
And the Lord birthed in me an idea that day at our local church that I pastor, to begin hosting what we called First Responders Sunday. And on First Responders Sunday, what our goal was to invite members from the first responders community, policemen, firemen, EMTs, everybody involved in the first responder community, have a special agenda, special service, put together a great dinner for them, and honor them in our church service to share. And even at that time, in 2014, when this first happened, even at that time, police were already suffering from a national stigma, and many people in many communities were being unkind to police officers for various reasons. And our church wanted to say to our local first responder community that we were there for them, to pray for them, to support them. And so the first time we did this, we had over 30 officers in uniform that were in our service. It blew me away, their response. The community had nothing like this was happening in the community. They found a place, they found a haven where people cared about them, were concerned about them. And it was probably only just a year or two later, and this is unrelated, of course, but I was excited to see that our Building the Bridge ministry developed a program called Appreciation Sunday. I'll encourage you to look at Building the Bridge website and check that out. Appreciation Sunday. Each year they choose a theme, and some years it's police force and different ones. But I was excited to see that happen. But I want to say the responses that I was able to get from that. Our mayor attended the service. Our police chief attended and spoke. Our fire chief attended and spoke. It is not really a small community. It was a big thing for them to all be there. And what we found were that there was a deficit in the relational connection to the police force, and they were hungry and interested to connect with an organization that was going to support them when what they were getting, and many times from the community, was not support. So here's what I want to say after having said that. I want to encourage us in our local churches, in our relationships, whether it be youth groups, whether it be ministries within a church. Obviously, I'm not your pastor. I wouldn't dare try to place ideas out there, but I'm just speaking to the church at large and say, let's find ways to connect with our police force. Many of my pastor friends are involved in police chaplaincy. Absolutely. It's been a great connection for them. But let's find ways to support, to show our police officers that we're praying for them, to do things that are kind. I don't want to say give gifts and things like that, because many police forces can't accept gifts. It creates an integrity ethics problem.
It's considered inducement.
It's considered inducement. So anything that's done on that regard, you need to research it with your local police force and see what their protocols are. But I think you'll find that the response can be great in the community. It can have some great benefits to the church as well by having some allies in your local police force. But not for that reason, but just simply for the reason that the people who serve. As a multicultural ministries director, my mandate personally is to help us as United Pentecostal Church notice and recognize communities and cultures that need evangelism focus on them. In a very real sense, when you consider that 800,000 to 900,000 people, 800,000 to 900,000 souls.
That's it.
In the United States alone. I don't know the numbers for Canada, but I'm sure there's a great number there as well. That's a lot of souls. That's a culture. You referred to yourself as a group earlier. That's a culture that we want to consider in our communities. There are people who serve in our police force that are dealing with the weight of things that they've had to deal with on a daily basis. Pastor Upton has shared some of those things with us. There is PTSD. There are times when they need counseling, they need support, they need a sounding board, they need a safe conversation to have. And it will be good if the police community was not the only community that was reaching out to them. And I'll say, in times that we're going through now, in social unrest, and we've seen situations where it's been made clearly and wildly transparent that in certain cases the police have made mistakes.
Absolutely.
And nobody's denying that. Pastor Upton certainly hasn't denied that either here today. But let's please understand that there are people behind those uniforms that have souls. And sometimes people are going to do evil things because that's the nature of a fallen man. But in many other cases, there are people that need ministered to. And we have a responsibility by the Word of God to minister to all parts of our community. And our police force is a great part of that community as well. So I want to leave you with that today by saying, find a way to support your local police officers. And if you have police officers that are part of your church, it might be just a great step to carve out some time with one of those individuals and just ask them some questions and let them share their stories with you and see what we can learn from it. But Pastor Upton, I want to say thank you for doing this today.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being a part of this with me. And in closing, what message or perspective would you like to share? I've asked you questions, and now I just want to give you the opportunity to say anything you'd like to say that maybe I haven't asked as a pastor, as a police officer in this turbulent time.
I appreciate that. A few closing remarks. Experts that study police officers and what they deal with, they've got a very telling phrase that they use. They say police officers suffer the death of 1,000 cuts. And they're referring to cumulative PTSD that officers go through from seeing dead bodies and seeing children. Personally, I have a friend of mine who was an officer who responded to a situation where it was one of his friend's son that was killed in a violent car crash. Well, he's carrying that, and nobody's ministering to him. So be there. Make yourself available. Recently, I did a project for my pastoral care class at UGST on ministering to law enforcement, and in the paper I wrote, and it hit me hard as I was writing this. People want to hear our war stories, but they don't want to hear about our pain. And wow. They will ask you, oh, tell me about this guy you arrested. Tell me about this high-speed pursuit. What happened in this use of force situation? Not realizing that you're asking questions, but I've got memories. And sometimes it's hard.
It's like asking a soldier in a war who's endured wartime experience.
Exactly. And I've got a couple situations where, if I go down a certain street, I go back to that night and that encounter where this guy was trying to hurt me and my partner, and we had to use force to take this violent felon into custody. I drive past a road every Sunday on my way to church, and most people don't realize almost every time I pass this road, I go back to a high-speed pursuit I had on that road. 3 a.m., my wife and children are home sleeping, and I've got this violent individual I'm chasing 100 miles an hour down this road, thinking to myself, if the grace of God doesn't show up and protect me, I might not go home to my children. So I passed that road on my way to church to preach, and I'm thinking about that night. I'm flashing back to that event. And so a few things to say: talk to your police officers, listen. This is going to be ignorant, but don't ask stupid questions. Because officers hurt. Do not come up and say, did you ever shoot anybody? Because I've got two friends of mine that had to use lethal force as a police officer, and they're still dealing with the pain of it. Twice in my life, I've drawn my firearm, and if you've never been in a situation where you've looked down the sight of your weapon at another human being and had to process, Jesus, I may have to shoot this person, you don't understand how heavy of a weight that is to carry. Wow. It is a very heavy weight to be placed in that position. So don't ask that. Talk to them. Don't ask them to share war stories. Just say, how are you doing? How can we pray for you? Give them an opportunity to open up and tell you about the tragedies they've dealt with, the trauma they've experienced, the burned bodies they've had to pull out of houses. But to do that, you got to build a relationship.
Sure.
And it's not just going to happen by you sending a card in the mail, but that's the start. Show up at your local police station with your children in tow and say, we're so thankful for you guys. My children, they made some cards for you. Our church, we take over bottled water to our police department. Because when you're 220 pounds and you put on your gear and you're now 240, 50 pounds and it's 90 degrees out, you drink a lot of water.
Sure.
So it's just a wonderful gesture to build a connection between our church and the local police department to let them know we care. Then as you build that relationship, let it grow to the point where they're comfortable and open up. And let God use you to help heal a lot of the hurt. Because most police officers won't go to counselors. They're just not going to do it. But if you're the chaplain and you've been on calls with them while they're doing this stuff, they open up. I can't speak highly enough about the chaplain ministry and how God can use you in that context to build a relationship with these men and women in law enforcement and give them an opportunity to share their pain with you. And as you share their pain, they share their pain with you, God's going to use you to help heal that. And ultimately, the purpose is to bring salvation, to get them connected to God. Pray for the families. They're the unsung heroes. I will often hear, Pastor, we're praying for you. Or, officer, thank you so much. We're praying for you. But who's praying for my wife? Mm-hmm. Who's praying for my children? Make it a point. I think it would be a beautiful gesture to go into your local police department and say, we are grateful for the officers, but we brought some stuff here to just take home, give to your wife and children. You know, cards thanking them for the wife or the husband that sends their spouse off to work every day, because the appreciation never goes beyond the department. And that would just be a beautiful gesture to do so. And also respect the officer's personal space. If you see the officer out and he gave you a traffic citation and you see him out with his family, please don't go up and try to adjudicate it at that point.
Not a good idea.
It happens. I've had it happen to me. Respect their personal space and honestly pray. I don't know a single officer or department who does not want prayed for. We know the evil that lurks in our community. And I police in a very great town, very good town that supports law enforcement. But there's so much bad and evil that happens in our town that our officers deal with on a regular basis that nobody knows about. It never makes it to the newspaper, but the officers are dealing with it day after day. So be there, be a present. I love the Appreciation Sundays. It's a beautiful gesture to give back to your community. Do that. It really, truly means a lot. One last point on how to show appreciation. Our community has gone above and beyond in their love and respect for our department. Do not walk up to an officer at lunch and say, can I buy your meal? Because he's going to tell you no, because that's an exchange of favors and inducement, and we cannot do that. If you truly want to do that, don't tell me you're doing it and just do it.
Just do it.
When the waitress comes up, and this happens all the time, someone paid for your meal. And Brother Chavis, I'll be honest, we really appreciate that. It does not go in one ear and out the other. It does make us feel appreciated that people care and concerned about what we are going through, and it means a lot. But I can't say it enough, pray. I've got good friends that are apostolic, that are police officers, that feel marginalized right now, and they feel as though people don't care about them. So if you know a police officer, just send them a text message, Facebook message. Hey, I love you, I'm praying for you, I'm here. Just let them know that you care. That means a lot.
Well, Pastor Upton, I want to tell you it's been a privilege to have you come and be a part of this. I think that the advice and the perspectives that you've shared today are going to be helpful to the people who will take the time to watch this video. And so I want to thank you for that, for sharing your heart, sharing your experience. And I want to take a moment and just pray for you and your family and the law enforcement community. Lord, today, by the authority of your word and by the power of your name, I pray that you would reach out to the law enforcement community that is a part of our United Pentecostal Church Fellowship as members, some in ministry, chaplains, and various officers. I pray today that you'd put your hand of safety upon them. Lord, I pray that you'd place a hedge of safety around their lives in the interactions that they make with civilians in the community, many of those in criminal situations. I pray, God, that your hand of protection will be upon them. We need your grace and your mercy. I pray for their physical health. And Lord, I also pray for their mental health and the things that they see, the things that they're burdened with, God, that they have to interact with on a daily basis, images and activity that they come in contact with that could be detrimental to their soul. I pray that you'd anoint and free their mind in Jesus' name. Lord, I pray for their families that deal with the weight and make great sacrifices for their spouses or their father to be a part of the police force and law enforcement. I pray that you would encourage them and you would lift them. And in a time where many people are pointing the finger and casting blame on police officers because of the mistakes made by a few, I pray that you would help us to rise above and have a general focus and understanding opinion, and bless our police force, encourage our police force, encourage them and their families. And I pray that our local churches in every community could be a lighthouse and could be a place of refuge for this culture of people that serve and protect. I pray over them in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you, Pastor Upton. For those of you that are watching, this has been another episode of Multicultural Stories. I understand that you may not agree with everything that was said, but this is our story, and that we're just trying to share and add a voice to the narrative. This is our story. This is our perspective. Thank you for joining us. God bless you.